Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to see everyone involved in this event. My name is Ali Reza Hedayati. I'm a board member of the Iranian American Society of New York. We are very happy to be able to have these Zoom events every few weeks, generally every other Sunday evening. I'm going to speak English, not because Dr. Limbert or Ambassador Limbert does not understand Farsi. He's fluent in Farsi, but because maybe some of our guests are English speaking only and would like to enjoy this program in English. I will speak briefly in Farsi. Salam به همگی. امیدوارم همگی خوب باشن. ما خیلی دوست داریم از طرف هیئت مدیره Iranian American Society of New York که یه برنامه هایی برای ایرانیان نیویورک و همه آمریکا و دنیا داشته باشیم و امشب خیلی خوشحالیم که تونستیم دکتر جان لیمبرت برای ما یه پرزنتیشنی داشته باشن. امیدوارم که همگی خوب خوش سال نو رو خوب دارن میگذرونن و بهترین چیزها رو برای همگی دوست دارم داشته باشن. من الان دوست دارم یه دونه از هیئت مدیرانای ما رو و وایس پرزیدنت آقای پست پرزیدنت هم بودن آقای منیعی، سعید منیعی رو برای همگی شروع کنن. ببخشید برنامه رو برای ما پرزنت کنن، برای اینکه آقای منی بالاخره با امباسادور لیمبرت رابطه قشنگی دارن و دوست داریم که ایشون برنامه رو اجرا کنن به خاطر دوستیشون با امباسادور لیمبرت. آقای منی بفرمایید شما برنامه رو.
Thank you, Mr. Hedayati. Ladies and gentlemen, society members and friends, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight on the talk by Ambassador Limbert, who is a Foreign Service officer, academic, and novelist. Ambassador Limbert is familiar face to Iranian American Society. He was our keynote speaker in 2013 at our annual meeting, which was face-to-face in Long Island. Before passing microphone to Dr. Limbert, I'd like to share Ambassador Limbert's background. John Limbert served for 34 years in the U.S. Foreign Service and 12 years until June 2018 as a professor of Middle Eastern study at the United States Naval Academy. During his time in the Foreign Service, he served mostly in the Middle East and Islamic Africa, including posting in Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Ghana, and Sudan. He was among the last American to serve at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. He was ambassador to Mauritania 2000 and 2003, chief of mission in Sudan 2005, and president of the American Foreign Service Association 2003-2005. He also served two tours in Iraq in 2003 and 2004. In 2009-2010, while on leave of absence from the Naval Academy, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for Iranian affairs. John Limbert is a native of Washington, D.C. He received his MBA, BA, MA, and PhD from Harvard University, the last in history and Middle Eastern study. Before joining the Foreign Service, he taught in Iran as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kurdistan Province in 1964 and 66, where I had the honor of being his student while he was teaching in Sanandaj. Dr. Limbert was instructor at Shiraz, then Pahlavi University in 1969 to 72. He has written numerous articles and books on Middle Eastern subjects, including Iran at War with History, Shiraz in the Age of Hafiz, and Negotiation with Iran, Wrestling the Ghost of History. He also recently co-authored with Ambassador Mark Grossman the espionage novel, Believers, Love and Death in Tehran. John Limbert holds the Department of State's highest award, the Distinguished Service Award and Department Award for Valor, which he received in 1981 after 14 months as a hostage in Iran. He and his wife, the former Parvaneh Tabibzadeh, live in New York City. Tonight, Dr. Limbert talks about Iran, US-Iran relation, why it's so difficult. After the talk, we open the mic as you can ask a question. All attendees will be on mute. At this time, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce you to John Limbert. Mr. Limbert, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Saeed, and thank you, Dr. Hidayati. It's a pleasure to see all of you. It's a pleasure. I noticed that we are also joined tonight by some fellow veterans of Iran Peace Corps. I'm very flattered. I'm very flattered by that introduction. I would be very happy, Saeed, if you would just continue with that flattery, make that the whole program. I understand tonight that we're competing with the Oscar presentation. So I'll do my best. I have been honing my acting skills over the last few weeks, and I'll do my best. Let me also thank everyone in the Iran American Society. It's a wonderful program. I want to thank them for the Nowruz program about a month ago that was done. That was magnificent. The music, the comedian, of course, listening to Maz Jobrani and his friend Tehran is always such a joy. And so thank you. I know that was a lot of work went into putting that together. I think you had some side. You were telling me you had 600 or 700
yes
people join that, and it was a marvelous program. Both my wife and I thank you for thank you for that one.
Thank you.
As Saeed mentioned, our connection goes back almost 60 years. Actually, connection to not just between the two of us, but to his wonderful family, and also between his family and my wife's family, and my wife's family, from days in beautiful Sanandaj. Let me start off with some personal notes. My connections to Iran, as noted, they go back a long way. They go back almost 60 years. I tell my students that when I first went to Iran, it was in 1962. I was a university student at the time. And at that day, when I went there, Ali Amini was the prime minister. And John Kennedy was president of the United States. I mean, think about that in terms of timing. When I tell that to my students, they'll say, oh, John Kennedy, was that before or after Abraham Lincoln? And so I tell them, well, I may be old, but I'm not quite that old, not quite that old. But just to give you an idea that how far back my connections go. And I was there as a Peace Corps volunteer, as a tourist, as a researcher, as a university instructor, as a diplomat, briefly, as a prisoner, a little bit longer. But my strongest connection, and really the most powerful one, is through my wife and her family. That I'm part of a very proud Iranian family, and very proud to be a member of it. And so I am a son-in-law, a husband, a brother-in-law, an uncle, and of course also a parent of some Iranian American children, and grandparent of some Iranian American grandchildren. But in the interest of full disclosure, let me say something right up front, and that is I am not a fan. I do not like the Islamic Republic. That is not my favorite government in the world, or a form of government that I would choose to live under, or one that I would wish for my all of my good Iranian friends and family members to live under. I would like to see my friends live with a government that treats them decently, that listens to their concerns, that doesn't harass people who ask questions, doesn't harass writers and translators and journalists and lawyers and filmmakers and all its best people and talented people. I also, however, would like to see a different kind of relationship between our two countries. It's no secret the two countries have been hostile to each other. Our two countries have been estranged now for over 40 years. And to me, there should be a different way and a better way of carrying on the relationship. Not that we like each other, not that the two countries like each other, not that they accept each other's governments, but at least a different relationship than the one we have had of no war, no peace, but sometimes close to war. Now, the question we're talking about tonight is why have U.S.-Iran relations been so difficult, and so difficult for so long? Why have they been so hard to change? Now, my quick answer is I don't know. And the other quick answer is it's very complicated. But I use this question when I was teaching, had the honor of teaching future U.S. Navy and Marine officers at our Naval Academy in Annapolis. I taught there for about 12 years. And I put that question to my students as their final exam question. I said, all right, open book, take home, open book, write what you want, but tell me why you think this relationship has been so difficult for so long. And came up with some good answers. I mean, they were they looked at the history, they looked at the thing they did, which was so important, was they looked at the history. They talked about what had happened over not just the last 40 years, but over the last 100 years between our two countries, going back to the early 20th century, and the periods talk about the constitutional period, and they pointed to Baskerville and Schuster and Millspaw and the Azerbaijan crisis and all of these things. So they knew, I think they knew more about the subject than most other Americans. But at the end of the day, they would come to me after the exam. Some of them would come to me and say, okay, professor, what's the answer? Why have these things been resolved? What's the answer to the exam question? And my response was, I don't know either. That's why I'm asking you. I want to find out your ideas. Now, okay, so why are they so difficult? Well, it turns out that if you ask many Americans why they're so difficult, they will point to the events of 1979, particularly November 1979, when a group of calling themselves Muslim students, followers of the Imam's line, occupied the U.S. Embassy in what may have begun as a 1970s style student sit-in, but became a long-term occupation and hostage taking, and developed into a crisis that really consumed certainly American attention, if not world attention, for over a year, and which cost President Jimmy Carter his presidency, caused him to lose his presidency. And Americans will point to that and said, okay, there's the problem. There's where the problem started. Iranians will sometimes give you a different answer. They will point to August of 1953 and the coup, what's called the Bistahash Modad, the coup, American and British backed, that brought down the National Front government under the leadership of Dr. Mossadegh, a government that aimed to give Iranians control over their most important resource, their oil. And they will tell you that is where the problem began. In other words, both look at this issue. How can I say this? They use the concept of original sin, and they say, okay, it was the sin of the other side that caused this problem. It was either the sin committed in 1953 by the Americans or the sin that the Iranians committed in 1979. Now, I beg your indulgence. I have my own starting point for the problem. And perhaps, Saeed, you will remember this. My starting point was, I think, sometime in the year 1965, when I went into your 8th grade English class at Shahpur High School in Sanandaj, and I faced 65 8th grade boys as a young, inexperienced English teacher. Now, Saeed was a very good student.
Yeah, thank you.
But that class just ate me alive. And I always said that, for me personally, that was the crisis. That was the beginning point of the crisis in Iran-American relations. I mean, 65 years later, I still have nightmares about that class. I'm sure you remember it well also. But the problem is not so much, in my view, the problem is not so much the sin itself. I mean, the problem is not that the Americans did this or the Iranians did that. The problem that's what has kept relations difficult, what has kept relations so bad, is the long failure on both sides to acknowledge that a sin was committed, that a mistake was, that wrong decisions were taken, bad decisions were taken. For the U.S., and on both sides, we pretended that this thing never happened. I mean, it took the U.S. from 1953 until 1999. So that's what, almost 50 years, well over 40 years before an American official, in this case, Secretary of State Albright, acknowledged the American role in the events of 1953. Now, scholars, historians, people still argue just what was the role in 1953, and they will continue to argue about that, but there was definitely an American, that I think people agree on. There was an American role in those events, but it took it took almost 50 years before, about 40, perhaps 45 years before the Americans would acknowledge it officially. British still have not acknowledged so many years afterwards. So 65 years or 75 years after it. The same thing goes for 1979 for the Iranians. They pretend it doesn't exist. Or perhaps even worse, they pretend it was a good thing. And at least some groups every year on Sistah Alban or 4th of November, they demonstrate in front of the American embassy as though they taking pride in what was in fact a disgraceful action. I can tell you a brief story of how former President Ahmadinejad and his view. He came to New York back 2011, I believe it was, and gave a dinner, invited a number of sort of American academics or private citizens. I was a private citizen at the time, so I was invited to this, and he gave a talk. He would speak and then open up the floor for questions. And he said, he said, I would really like to see better relationship between us. He said, but the problem is that there exists between us a negative mentality. Zehniyat manfi, that was the phrase that he used. He said there's a negative mentality and we need to overcome that. Okay, when it came time to the questions, I asked him, I said, Mr. President, I'm glad to hear that you were seeking better relations. And I noticed you speak about the Zehniyat manfi, the negative mentality, but one thing that might help would be to deal with the events of 1979, and specifically having hostage takers, people responsible for those events in your cabinet as ministers or high officials. And I named some names, so he knew exactly who I was talking about, is not helpful. It doesn't get rid of that negative mentality. And he looked at me, as though I was talking Chinese to him. He was sort of thinking, well, where did that come from? And his attitude was, that happens sort of like Star Wars. That's like Star Wars. It happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And what does that have to do with today? Well, that's the problem that we're dealing with, because as long as neither side will acknowledge the grievances of the other or the views of the other, the problem becomes worse, and it becomes, you're not listening to us. And then what happens? Both sides fall into this trap of repeating their lists of grievances. What you like to say in Persian, geliguzari. It's a kind of mutual exchange of grievances. It's like a couple in a bad marriage. And that's basically where the relationship has been stuck now for 40 years. Okay, let's begin. Let me say a couple things that are obvious. One is that whatever we've done, whatever both sides have done for the past 40 years, perhaps as an effort to change the relationship, hasn't worked. We're still pretty much where we are, where we've been. Iran remains a diplomatic pariah. It has very few friends, except maybe the ruined Syria and small and landlocked Armenia, can count among its friends. The economy is in bad shape. The currency is pretty much worthless. An Iranian passport makes it pretty difficult. I'm sure you know, it makes it pretty difficult to travel. You know, back in the 70s, my wife and I would travel in Europe. She had her Iranian passport, and she got a lot more respect than I did with my American passport. We lived in Shiraz. We lived in Shiraz in those days. Between us, we made the equivalent of about $400 or $500 a month, and had a very nice middle class life with that income. Today, that income those salaries we received were worth about 50 cents at the current exchange, the current exchange rate. For the U.S., similarly, the policies of the last 40 years haven't really achieved anything. I mean, we've talked about, we've had a lot of empty phrases and empty slogans like dual containment and maximum pressure, but they've yielded nothing. Iran remains hostile and opposes U.S. policies in the region. As one Iranian diplomat told a Princeton class where I was once, he said our foreign policy is based on opposition to you. So that's where we are now. When a policy doesn't yield any results for 40 years, when you get no progress, no positive results out of a progress, what's the logical step? Well, you change the policy. You do something else. But that's been hard to do. And the reason, there seem to be three principles that govern this relationship. One is everything you do is harder than you think. And everything you do takes longer than you think. And whenever you start to make progress, something or someone or some bad fortune is going to come along and screw it up. I mean, we have examples. We have the look at the nuclear agreement. I mean, it took from 2009 to 2015-16 to negotiate that agreement. It was hard. It took about 8 years. I mean, the first 4 years of that, there was no progress at all. And then once there was a breakthrough in about 2013, it still took another 3 or 4 years to get to the agreement. And then what happened, of course, along comes the election of Donald Trump in 2016, and everything is, all the progress you made has gone out the window. But it's not hard. It's not hard to list problems. That's easy to do. I mean, any of us can sit here for hours and talk about, well, this problem and that problem and other problems. But what can we actually do? Is there some way of changing this relationship? Well, let me give you some of my ideas, and that is, first, you have to have goals. You have to know what you want, and you have to know what the other side wants. Otherwise, how do you measure success? I think it's Alice in Wonderland, they say, if you don't know where you're going, any road that you choose will take you there. So find out where you want to go. The example I use is when President Nixon went to China for the first time in 1971, I think it was. And I'm not a great admirer of President Nixon, but he did something very simple. He took a yellow legal pad, drew a line down the middle, and listed on one side what we want, what they want. In other words, this is our goal. These are our goals. This is the other side's goals. It's very simple, but it it works. And it's for the most part, we haven't done that in our dealings with Iran. Second, you cool the language. You don't use inflammatory language on the other side. I mean, referring to the other side as satanic or malign doesn't help. It's not constructive. It's generally not constructive. And so insisting that the other side, quote, change its behavior is not helpful. It's usually just insulting. I mean, imagine if you're in some kind of relationship with your spouse or your friend, and you say to that person, or that person says to you, everything would be fine in this relationship if you would just change your behavior. Think about that. Not very helpful. No, probably not very helpful. Third, use the tools of diplomacy. They're not hard. We all know what they are. They're patience, forbearance, listening, and empathy. Empathy. Think about what the other side wants. How will the other side view this action or this statement? The problem is they're not, everyone knows what they are. The problem is that over the last 40 years, we haven't used them much. And so either we've forgotten how to use them or they've gotten rusty. But they will work. Let me end with a question that I get often. My views on the U.S.-Iran relationship have not brought me a lot of friends. The Americans sometimes call me the Manchurian candidate, and I can't repeat what Iranians say about me. What some Iranians have said about me, but because the question I get is, how can you argue for a different? They say to me, how can you argue for a different relationship with a country that did what it did to you and your colleagues in 1979? And my response is, look, what happened to us in 79 and 80, that was difficult. It was frightening in some ways. It was very hard on our families. But who were the real victims of that action? And I would put to you, the real victims were ordinary Iranians, our Iranian friends, our Iranian relatives, who have been suffering since then for 40 years. I mean, because you can look at the brutality, you can look at the repression, and how much that action intensified the difficulties that they've had, and that all of you have had, and your friends and your family members have had for the last 40 years. I'll just end with a story that gives the flavor of that. In 1989, I believe, I was working at the U.S. consulate in Dubai, and we saw a lot of Iranians coming in for visas, because of course the visa, you couldn't get an American visa inside Iran. Dubai was a relatively easy place to get to. So I was speaking to a young woman, of about, she must have been about 35 years old, a social worker from Esfahan, very well spoken. And I asked her why she wanted to go. I asked her why she wanted to go to the United States. And she just sighed. And I could hear her thinking, God protect me from these stupid questions. And she said, sir, can you imagine what it's like to live as a woman in the Islamic Republic of Iran? I need a break. It is constant pressure. People are always watching whatever I do. I can't say this, I can't do that, I can't go here, I can't go there. I just need a break to get out, to get out. And of course, I gave her the visa immediately. Well, let me end on that story, and thank you so much for your attention. I know you would have preferred to watch the Oscars tonight, but I look forward to hearing your views and your questions. So thank you again to Dr. Hidayati and to Mr. Saidi.
Thank you, Dr. Limbert. Let me start a couple of questions, then we open it up. I want to go back to 1978 rather than 79.
Okay, as long as you don't go back to 1965, I am very happy.
No, I'm not. And I've just recently read the article that on November 9th, 78, U.S. Ambassador Sullivan sent an eyes-only cable to Secretary of State in Washington, urging the major change policy. And the title of the cable was Thinking Unthinkable, to change the policy and support the Ayatollah. And U.S., I think the White House did not agree with it. And Brzezinski had a dispute with Secretary Vance, and he submitted his resignation according to this article, and Secretary Vance got involved. Why I'm asking this? Because my real question is, it appears that there is no solid policy in the State Department and NSA and the White House and all the decision maker in the United States. Is that, and also I think it was, I don't know what one person mentioned, I don't want to say you did, but was a surprise that nobody in the State Department can speak Farsi, at least for maybe 20 years, and then start paying attention to it. Is it missed by State Department, missed by White House, or is it political pressure from different lobby that this revolution there was no direction, and that's why it created kind of hostility about the pro-Ayatollah versus pro-Shah, and basically United States lost both groups. That's my really first question.
Okay, so Said, well, I'm glad you started off with such an easy question. This is hard stuff, but it's you raise an interesting point. My view is that in the United States, among people who should have known the revolution of 1970, of the Islamic Revolution of 78, 79, it caught everyone by surprise. It's what's called, I think political scientists refer to it as a black swan event. I mean, black swans happen, they exist, but they're very rare. And this one caught everyone by surprise. I mean, think about this. President Carter went to Tehran in the end of 1977. And he spent New Year's Eve there with the Shah, and he gave his famous toast about the island of stability and so forth, and you're beloved by your people and all, and this and that. But I think if you had looked at Iran at that time, most people at least from the outside would have said, well, yeah, I mean, it has money from its oil, it's making progress, there's economic progress, there's educational progress. Yes, there is dissatisfaction, but there's always been some dissatisfaction. And at least the monarchy appeared to be, from the outside, pretty stable. And not only did the Americans government missed it. Every other government missed it. Most of my Iranian friends missed it. I certainly missed it. I didn't expect things to go in the direction that they did. Now, Sullivan's cable, maybe as right, as accurate as it was pretty late. I mean, by November of '78, things had seriously deteriorated. But even though he may have been stating the obvious, it was, as you said, it was not well received and not welcome at all by the administration, by the White House. I mean, that's an understatement. Basically Sullivan and the White House they were not talking to each other. They had stopped listening to him because they didn't want to hear what he was saying. And when he came back to Washington, I mean, in fact, President Carter wanted to pull him out of Tehran. And because I believe there's a story that there was a plan to send an American envoy, former ambassador to Afghanistan, Ted Elliott, to meet with Khomeini in Paris back in January of '79. And it was scrubbed at the last minute. It was canceled. And when Ambassador Sullivan heard this, his response, I don't know if it was in a message or something like, "What idiot made this decision?" Well, it turned out that the idiot who made the decision was Jimmy Carter. And from then on, I mean, Sullivan was just, a non-person. And Carter wanted to take him out right then. And I believe Secretary of State Vance talked him out of it, saying, "Look, it's in the middle of a revolution. You can't just pull the ambassador out." But when Sullivan came back to the U.S., finally, I think it was in March of that year, he was a non-person. In fact, a friend of mine who worked in the State Department said they didn't even want to give him a desk to work in. They had to scramble to find a desk because what he was saying was they didn't want to hear. And unfortunately, there's a long tradition of that in our our bureaucracy. I mean, U.S. Embassy had warned, had told our government, if you admit the Shah, we're finished, we're done. Embassy's over. Now, either they just paid Washington. That's not what Washington wanted to hear, so they didn't pay any attention. Now, after the fact, people in Washington, when they write their memoirs, they'll say, "Oh, we never heard that. I never saw that message. Nobody brought that to my attention," which is simply not true. But we could have a whole, we could do a whole session on just the kind of question and answer, try to answer the questions that you made.
Yeah. To follow with that question, also Sullivan had an interview on December 18, '78 in front page of New York Times. He was very pleased with the progress is happening in Iran. He said there is a 58 million Iranian are Muslim, and north of Iran is about 40 million Muslim live. And that will stop Soviet Union to access to Persian Gulf. My question is, based on that interview, again, that is only interview that it was New York Times printed, and I actually read it at the time I was here. So my question is, do you think part of this all misunderstanding, this miscalculation, the United States want to sacrifice Iran to stop Soviet Union from expansion, which end up going to Afghanistan, they couldn't go to Iran because Iran was too big for them.
Said, you've hit you hit a very important point, which was since 1945. So since 1945, U.S. policy toward Iran was guided by what I call the Prime Directive. Those of you who are Star Trek fans will know about the Prime Directive. This was the Prime Directive of U.S. policy was keep the Soviets out. Keep the Soviets out of Iran. Keep the Soviets keep the Soviet hands off of the Iranian government, Iranian territory, and Iranian oil. And this was the number one, the number two, and the number three priority, really, for all American governments, really, up well and through the revolution, up to the revolution, through the revolution, until the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, how else do you explain Iran-Contra, except with this obsession about that Iran is going to fall to the Soviet Union? Yes, that was still there. It was also, I think, we get into this, but it's also, I think, the reason that I and my colleagues were still in Tehran on November 4th of 1979. Because when I used to talk about this with my students, and the first question my students ask is, why in the world were you still there with all that had happened, particularly after the admission of the Shah in October, in late October? And the only answer I can come up with was this desire, the view of Iran as this very important piece in the Cold War competition. And yes, that's the way it's viewed. And unfortunately, of course, it blinded us to other things that were going on in the country.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sajun, if you can if anybody has a question, please raise your hand so we can, Dr. can open the mic. So.
Is it open for me?
Yes, you can. Yes, you open.
We have Miss Joanne.
Okay, Dr. Limbert, thank you for.
Mr. Khosrowshahi, can you give us 1 second?
Yes.
Let Miss Joanne go first, because I know.
Okay, ladies first.
Ladies first.
You're muted, Joan.
Joan?
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, John, I hate to go back to 1965. I really do. But if you'll remember, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I'm just turning my volume up a little.
In 1965, Peace Corps volunteers were already talking about not when, if the revolution would happen, but when. This was 1965. We knew it would. And it bothered us that nobody would listen to us in the Peace Corps office in Tehran, certainly not in Washington. And we knew that, and it was very frustrating. I don't know if you felt the frustration that a lot of us felt, but we felt like, things are very, very wrong here. There was a lot of discontent with the Shah, and we were part of that. And it was very disheartening. But that's beside the point. What I want to know, you mentioned that US policy in that era, 1953 to 79, was based on oil. But what would be an alternative policy to the one between 1953 and 79 and 79 onward? What would be a decent policy where we could get back to a decent relationship with Iran? You mentioned that you want a policy based on patience, forbearance, and empathy. Where do we go? How do we get there realistically?
Okay, am I good? Am I good here? All right. Thank you. First of all, let me recognize Joan. She was she was part of the Peace Corps group, the same Peace Corps group. We went out in 1964. In 1964, I went to San Andaj. Joan, where did you serve?
Rasht, which is the prettiest city in Iran, I must say.
In Rash. Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Very good. Well, some of us went to greener places than others did, but I was very fortunate in my posting for all kinds of reasons. Joan is completely right. You could sense a kind of unease that was going on. I mean, there was obviously adulation for the Shah. There were the statues everywhere, the pictures everywhere, the birthday celebrations everywhere, the speeches in his praise and so forth. But you could certainly sense the unease. I don't know if you remember this, Joan, but we had a teacher in our one of our Persian teachers when we were studying back at the University of Michigan, preparing to go to Iran, who came and said to us, you will have access to the Shah. Maybe you might have access to be able to get close to the Shah. None of us can do that. If you do, you should assassinate him.
I remember.
You remember that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was the kind of that we heard that. This was from week 2.
I was horrified.
But you had you could certainly you could feel the unease. You could sense the unease, but it was not focused. And I think I would not have predicted that the source, the guiding hand of the revolution would come from where it did.
Yeah.
That would come from the clergy. I thought it might come from somewhere, didn't know. Maybe, ethnic discontent, or from the left, or from the military coup, or from the nationalists, or from where. But didn't see it coming. I'll tell you another story from that period, though, that tells you how out of it I was. We were there in October of 1964. And that was the year that Ayatollah Khomeini was exiled. That was the month that Ayatollah Khomeini was exiled, because he had spoken out against the law giving immunity to American military advisors and their family, the so-called SOFA, the Status of Forces Agreement. And it was a big deal. And in looking at it, it was one of the seminal events that led up to in a U.S.-Iran relations, and that led up to the revolution, because it made this clergyman who had been up to that time sort of identified with somewhat Ahunbazi kinds of things, right-wing causes. Now it made him a national hero, because he was speaking for Iranian dignity and independence, and against the so-called capitulation, the capitulations. That was October of 1964. Where I was, I didn't hear one word about it. Not a word. There was, of course, nothing in the news, nothing in the papers, nothing on the radio, nothing on the radio. No one would talk about it. Not in front of me. They wouldn't talk. Wouldn't talk about it. And so I had no idea. I don't know, Joan. Did you know what was going on?
I did hear every once in a while. You would hear Khomeini's name, and Mossadegh was the same thing. If you mentioned either one of those names, immediately the conversation shut down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
There was no discussion at all.
Here we were there during one of the most important events in the spreading of this discontent, in sowing the seeds of the revolution. And at least me personally, I knew nothing about it.
I didn't, nothing.
Okay.
It was weird.
Okay. Next is Mr. Khosrow. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Limbert, thank you very much for lovely presentation and history. But I would like to actually add to the equation, even though the presentation is about the Iran and US relationship, but I would like to add Israel to the equation. As we know, actually, Israel and Iran, they're actually on continuous strategic collusion. And due to the fact that actually recent news and their influence, whatever they do, Iran outside and also inside, I was wondering, this third party, what would be the impact of getting the normalizing the relationship between Iran and US?
Let me make sure I understand your question. Your question is about sort of Israeli views of and how the Israeli views will affect the possibility of normalization.
Well, not their views, their actions outside and also inside the Iran. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of actually influence via Mossad inside the Iran. So if actually the international community trying to normalize towards, getting relationship between Iran and US, what would be the impact of their action in reference to this normalization and getting the agreement?
Okay. Thank you for the question. That's another hard question. That's another hard question.
Right.
First of all, I can't speak for another government. I can't can't even speak for our government, but I certainly can't speak for Israel and the Israeli government. But I can tell you what some of my Israeli friends tell me.
Right.
And first of all, what they tell me is this: the issue of Iran is in Israel has become a very divisive and domestic political issue. It is one that the current prime minister and his allies are using for domestic, to get votes, basically, for their own political purposes.
Right.
And has very little to do with Iran. Just like, if you look at the history of the actions of Prime Minister Netanyahu against his actions against the agreement and against engagement. An Israeli friend explained this to me very well. He said, these actions have nothing to do with Iran. Iran is irrelevant. This is during the time of the negotiation of the nuclear agreement, the Barjam, the JCPOA. You remember he actually uninvited by the president, Netanyahu gets on a plane and comes to Washington, invited by the opposition party in Congress. Yes. I mean, if I were if I had been president, I would have thrown the Israeli ambassador, told him to pack his bags and leave. I mean, this is a violation of every principle of diplomacy, but he does it. And the way my Israeli friend explained it to me, he said this had nothing to do with Iran. This was an alliance between the Israeli right wing and the American right wing. And the target of this alliance was not Iran, but was Obama.
I see.
Because they found a common enemy, and one they hated more than Iran. They didn't care about Iran.
That's interesting.
They hated Obama. they hated Obama. Now, on the other side, I must say that again, talking. I'm just telling you what I hear from my Israeli friends. They say, look, the anti-Israeli rhetoric coming out of the Islamic Republic has played into the hands of Netanyahu and his right-wing allies. There's talking about erasing Israel from the pages of time, or whatever other language they use. It's not reassuring language to hear, particularly with a country, the history that has the history that Israel does. The story goes that when President Ahmadinejad left office in 2013, that Prime Minister Netanyahu went into mourning. You know, the boss he lost his best enemy at that point. Now, will the Netanyahu government attempt to, undermine a engagement, underline a renegotiation of the, a renewal of the nuclear agreement? Probably. But I would say again, there's also a great division of opinion within Israel. And one of the interesting things about Israel, if you follow the politics, debate there is very open and very free and very blunt.
Thank you.
But they could not stop the negotiation of the agreement in 2015-16. And there were voices in Israel that would say, this is a good thing. If our concern is the actual threat posed to us by an Iranian nuclear program, then this is a good thing if it limits the program. But they were thinking the issues. They were thinking the issues of the prime minister and his allies were thinking, how do I get votes?
Okay. We have Dr. Nurchash has a question. Dr. Nurchash, could you unmute yourself? Dr. Nurchash, can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Limbert, Dr. Nurchash also taught at Shiraz University. So in a case that you want some compatriots, so he taught at Shiraz University many years ago.
Oh, maybe we were colleagues then.
Perhaps. Professor Lambert, thank you for your great presentation. What crossed my mind as you were presenting your hope for improvement of the relations between the two governments. When we refer to Iranians, do you think it is necessary to separate the government from the people of Iran? And the reason why I'm asking this is the fact that from what you can clearly see, this government with the ideology behind its actions is not what represents the people of Iran at the present time. We hear news of massacres in the scores on the streets of the country and lack of any tolerance for any dissent. Let me just tell you, I'm not complaining, but I was expelled from Shiraz University when they changed the name because of our opposition with the closure of the university. If you remember that it happened. So what I'm thinking is that the analysis of the government people in this country as well as elsewhere is the acts between the people who are in power and completely independent from what goes on in the minds of people in the country. Now, let me just tell you, even during the time of Shah, there was repression. And one of the reasons why people rose up during 79 was the oppression that existed during the time of Shah. Just to give you an example, during the revolution, and the only groups who were free to do whatever they wanted to do were the clerics. At the time of revolution, there were 64,000 mosques allowed to operate in Iran, but there was no free newspaper or party. And at that time also, there was a problem. So basically what I'm asking as a great diplomat as you have been, is there a way that the policies of the United States go directly to the people of the Iran rather than a bunch of ignorant mullahs?
Thank you, Dr. Nurchesh. By the way, which department did you teach at the university?
I was a professor of engineering.
Oh my gosh, the engineering school. That was I had a lot. I taught English. I had a lot of engineering students in my class. They were tough, but they were good. They were really smart. They were really smart. So I salute you. I salute you for that. No, separating the people from the government. Well, it's obvious. We all do that. We have to do that. I mean, I certainly, do that every day. I think of my Iranian friends and family and the people I know, and all of you here, in one way, with very warm and affectionate feelings, but my feelings toward the government are not that way. are not that way. I think we all do. I think we all do that. But who has really separated is the government itself. They have made the they have made the separation, and I think you pointed out. You pointed to this yourself, Dr. Nurchesh. One of the things that you see over and again, I regret, one of my greatest regrets is that for the last 40 years, I've not been able to go to Iran. I've not been able to visit. I would love to go back and visit just to see friends, and probably my friends all, I'm sure now have grandchildren or grandparents, but to go and see them, to go see some of the places, to go back to Sanandaj and see the Abidar mountain and all these things. But in Shiraz, of course, and eat ashikardeh at the Sadi shrine and do these things, but I can't. And I'm told that this those of my friends who do go and who are very lucky, fortunate to go, say it's a very different place and a very different country from what we knew, from what we knew. And one of the things that's clearly happening is that there is a separation between what we can call the state and society. And the state is increasingly ossified. What's the word? Mutahajir. It's frozen in time. It's not moving. It's ossified. It becomes increasingly repressive, increasingly brutal. The leaders are getting older and older and older and are dying off, but still remain in their own world. And the society is very different. Society is, at least from what I see and what I hear, is very dynamic. You have people who are so creative, who are very engaged, who are well educated. I mean, Sanandaj, where I was now, has a university. There's even a branch university, and of all places, in Kamyaran, of all places, on the road to Kermanshah. I remember what Kamyaran was like when we were there. We were there. it's a very dynamic society, and you have people who are savvy, who are creative. Look at the films that are being made. Look at the writings that's being done. It's the music that's being done, that's being made. It's very creative, and this gap is getting larger and larger and larger. And eventually, but I can't say when, and I can't say how. That's not a tenable situation. That such a system is going to collapse as the gap gets larger and larger. Now, having said that, from a government point of view, though, one needs to tread carefully, because one feature of U.S. Public policy has been, for 40 years, has been to say, Iran, we hate your government, we love your people. And therefore, we're going to sanction you. And we're not going to allow grandmothers to come and visit their grandchildren. We're going to harass you when you get to the border. We're going to sanction you so you can't, you're not going to have a job because your factory's going to close down. Your factory's going to close down. But we love you. Be assured that we do love you, and we hate your government. This has not been it's what I talked about. Doing this for 40 years has had no results. Hasn't worked. This kind of official, talking about how much we love the people and how much we hate the government hasn't worked. Obama tried if you remember this, President Obama tried something new. In his first Nowruz address that he gave out in 2009, he said, I want to speak directly to the Iranian people, to the people and the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And you cannot underestimate what a change that was. He's saying, I'm speaking not just to the people, I'm speaking to the government, and using the official name to that. These are the kinds of tools of diplomacy that I talk about. The careful choice of words, careful choice of phrase. And yes, you can, obviously, we all make this separation. We have to. It's the only way really we keep our sanity, is to make this separation. But at the same time, in policy, you cannot deny the existence of a government. The nuclear agreement, we did not negotiate the nuclear agreement with people. We negotiated it with the government. And if we're going to have any different kind of relationship, it's going to be with a government, whether we like that government or not.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Limbert, I think that answers a lot of people's questions, that no matter what, we have to work with the government that's in place at this time. Does anyone have any further questions? I'll just see. I'd like to thank you. Oh, Ms. Mariam, last question. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask one question that lots of Iranians think. First of all, the discontent about Shah, most of it, beside the leftist group, were the religious group. As a kid, I could see how they were against Shah, against all the things which was going on, like women votes and stuff like that. And I am surprised how come US didn't see that. But what I am going to ask Ambassador is that in the last riot, Shah's last riot, it says the reason Shah was gone was because he didn't want to sign the agreement for oil confederation, whatever they call it. Consortium, yeah. And is that true? And that's why they say Carter helped Khomeini. Did he do that? what General Heiser was doing to tell the military not to interfere.
Okay, thank you for your question. Mariam, is it?
Yes.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you for your question. I think everyone here has been so polite. Usually, often when I give these talks, the first question that I get from an Iranian American group is, tell me, why did Carter get rid of the Shah? That's the first question. Why did he get rid of the Shah and replace him with Khomeini? Not did he, but why did he? That's the assumption. And I get this question frequently, and I really, and I don't think I can convince anyone the opposite. I don't believe that there was a deliberate plan on the president's part. I think he was caught off guard like everyone else. But I'll never convince people. So I'll tell you what I did. I was at a meeting. I was in Michigan. There was a meeting with a group of Iranian Americans, and all very like this group, all very well educated, doctors, engineers, business people, college professors, really smart people, and they asked me the same question, and I said yes, but not for the reason you think. And they all were really curious. Said, well, what was the reason? I said, well, Jimmy Carter was a graduate of the Naval Academy, the same place I taught. He served he was basically an engineer, nuclear engineer in his career. And he looked at the United States when he came into office in 1977. He looked at the United States and he said, we have a shortage of trained people in engineering and the sciences. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough engineers. We don't have enough scientists. What do we do? All right, we could train them ourselves, but that's very expensive. It takes a very long time. So what is the best source of trained scientists, engineers, and doctors? Where's the best place we can find them? And of course, the answer was Iran. Iran has thousands of highly trained, highly skilled people in the fields that we need. Problem was, in 1976 and 77, these people are very happy where they are. They're doing very well. They won't come here. So let's make a plan. You see where I'm going? Saeed, you see where I'm going. Let's make a plan. Let's do something to make life intolerable for these people. And what would make life intolerable to these people? A theocracy, a religious government. Bring the religious people to power. These people will leave. And I said this, and people looked at me and they said, oh, you're making a joke. And I said, I am making a joke, but look around the room and look around our group here. I mean, these are the people that are here. And I say most of you, I think of my own family, they would not have come. They were quite happy being in Iran and working there, but for the change of government and change of society and change of society. No, I think President Carter was caught off guard. He was not well served by his advisors. No one, as far as I know, somebody mentioned Ambassador Sullivan. That was late in the day, but no one. Not Secretary. I don't think Secretary Vance or Dr. Brzezinski ever went to him and said, "Sir, we don't think the Shah is going to survive. We think the Shah is going to go." And No one did that. And the reason they didn't do that was because they knew that Jimmy Carter is a very smart man. And he would have asked the next logical question, which would have been, all right, if that's true, what do you advise me to do about it? What should I do about it? And of course, the answer would have had to have been, these advisors would have had to say, sir, I don't have a clue. I just don't know. And no one wanted to look that ignorant in front of the president. So they didn't tell him. They didn't tell him. So there he goes off to Iran and makes the speech. But was this an action taken deliberately with a plan in mind, whether it was oil, whether it was stopping the Soviet Union, the so-called Green Belt that people talk about? Was it something else? I don't know. I would say this, though. And all of you, I'm sure all of you know this, the Shah himself believed it. He thought he had done something to displease not just the Americans, but other foreigners. And that for reasons that they didn't have to explain to him, they had decided to get rid of him. And on his deathbed, when he was on his deathbed, the former ambassador to Iran and head of the CIA, Richard Helms, went to see the Shah. And the Shah, who was dying at the time, said, I have just one last question for you. What's that? He said, why did you do it? Why did you get rid of it? So he went to his grave thinking that. I don't think so. I don't believe it, but I know it's a very strong current of opinion. It's a very strong current of opinion, and I have given up actually trying to argue people out of it. So thank you for the question. As I say, I expected the question earlier, actually, in the evening.
There is one more question from Mr. Mehdi Sarang.
I see two more questions.
Well, two. Let's start with Mr. Mehdi Sarang.
Ambassador Limbert, I'm 79, graduate of the best university, Wolverine and other Michigan, 1960 to 1967, and I love university. So when somebody mentions Michigan, for training, that's about the question. But I could talk to you an hour if I may invite you to San Diego. And
I'm sorry, Mr. Saram. I'm having great difficulty hearing you. There's an echo. There's echo in the sound.
My apology. I'm on my iPad. I apologize. Anyway, I'm from the University of Michigan, 1960 to 67. A nuclear engineer who worked in Iran during the time of Shah for 15 years. I see what could have happened. Excuse me a second.
No, we don't hear at all.
Oh, that's great.
Never mind. I apologize. Never mind. I withdraw my question.
Okay. Who was next person?
Mrs. Sarhangi, you have to unmute.
It's okay.
Yes, here.
Hi for everyone. I have a question. Are you hopeful that the new talks with Iran will succeed about the nuclear? They are talking recently.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Ms. Sarhangi. Thank you for your question. I am always hopeful.
Hopeful?
I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful. I've been hopeful for 40 years. For 40 years that we could reach a better place. That we could reach a better place. I'm hopeful that I can take my children and my grandchildren back to Iran and show them and show them where where the children were born, and where we lived. But going through these negotiations, yes, I think we could do it. I'm encouraged by what I see and hear from both sides. Both sides seem to be being very careful. I'm encouraged by what I can't speak very much to the Iranian side, but I can speak to the American side. And I think I'm very encouraged by what I have seen and about the team that President Biden has put together to deal with this. I know many of them, and they're very experienced people. They're very smart people, and they believe in diplomacy. They believe that we can do, because they've been through a process that reached a result. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something we can just say, well, let's do this tomorrow. Let's do this tomorrow. And because there is unfortunately, there is such a reservoir of mistrust. We just don't trust each other. You ask an American official, do you trust the Iranians? They'll say no. Do you ask an Iranian official, do you trust the Americans? They say no. And that's very hard to get around. And that's very hard to get around. So I go back to my principle. I think I mentioned during the talk, everything is harder than you think, and everything takes longer than you think. But I think if we use these, if we have patience, and if we have forbearance, and if we have persistence, I think we can get there. I know there's a will on the American side, and I think I see a will on the Iranian side.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Hidayati, you want to close the meeting?
I'm going to allow you to end it, Mr. Mani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Limbert, for joining us tonight. I know we passed more than half hour that we originally planned. We really appreciate you stay on and answer the question. We hope to see you in the fall. We talk about the Shiraz at the age of Hafiz. So we look forward to talk about something less difficult and less unknown than this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you. And just let me say, I look forward to it. I look forward to meeting in person, seeing all of you again after so long. Thank you for your attention. Thank you again to Dr. Hidayati and Mr. Mani and all of the members of IAS. Thank you for your excellent questions. I would only point out that if you look at Shiraz in the age of Hafiz lived in a period very much like our own, and the similarities become more and more striking. But we can talk about that as a future date, and I look forward to it. But I thank all of you, and now you can all safely leave the computer and go and watch the Oscars.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again.